Alright, all you jive turkeys and cool cats, gather around cause we're about to lay down a tale that's straight up out of sight. But not in a good way. This ain't your usual groove. This is the story of a teenage devil in disguise, a chick so cold she made ice cubes jealous. Judith Ann Adams was born into a world that seemed determined to chew her up and spit her out. Murfreesboro, Tennessee, might have held a certain small-town charm for some, but for Judith, it was a cage. Poverty was a suffocating blanket, and abuse cast long, dark shadows over her childhood. Judith's home life was far from a Norman Rockwell painting. Her father, absent and uncaring, was nothing more than a ghost haunting her life. Her mother, struggling to keep afloat, couldn't or wouldn't shield her daughter from the cruelties of the world. Judith became a fragile flower, wilting under the weight of neglect and despair. School offered little respite. She was an outcast, a target for bullies who sensed her vulnerability. Each cruel word, every shove, chipped away at her already fragile spirit. Judith learned to build walls, to armor herself against the pain. But behind those walls, a storm was brewing. By the time Judith reached her teens, she was a powder keg of anger and resentment. The world had shown her little kindness, and she was ready to pay it back in kind. She was a pressure cooker ready to explode, and when a charismatic ex-con with a devilish grin swaggered into her life, she didn't stand a chance. His name was Alvin Neelley, and he was everything Judith thought she ever wanted. Older, dangerous, and with a rap sheet longer than a Greyhound bus, Alvin was a bad boy straight out of a girl group song. He was a predator who saw in Judith the perfect prey, young, vulnerable, and desperate for the kind of love that could burn down the world. Their courtship was a whirlwind of stolen kisses, reckless joyrides, and whispered promises. Judith was intoxicated by Alvin's attention. He was the knight in tarnished armor who had come to rescue her from her dreary existence. She was blind to the red flags, deaf to the warnings from those who saw Alvin for what he truly was, a monster in disguise. They eloped when Judith was just 15, a child bride running headlong into the arms of a nightmare. Marriage for Judith wasn't about white dresses and floral bouquets. It was about escape, about finding someone, anyone, who would make her feel safe, wanted, alive. But the safety she craved was an illusion, a cruel trick played by a master manipulator. Alvin introduced Judith to a world of darkness she could never have imagined. He became her protector, her lover, her tormentor. He taught her how to shoot a gun, how to hotwire a car, how to disappear into the night. He filled her head with twisted fantasies and fueled her rage with cheap whiskey and promises of a love that could conquer all. But their love, if you could call it that, was a toxic brew that would soon leave a trail of blood and tears across the American South. The year was 1980. Disco was fading, Reagan was on the rise, and Judith and Alvin Neelley were on the run. They were a modern-day Bonnie and Clyde, living a twisted American dream fueled by petty theft, adrenaline, and a complete disregard for the law. But their crimes were about to take a dark and deadly turn. It started with a seemingly random encounter at a Georgia shopping mall. Janice Chapman, a young woman full of life and dreams, was snatched away in broad daylight, vanishing without a trace. Panic gripped the community as posters with Janice's smiling face appeared on every telephone pole. Little did anyone know, a nightmare of unimaginable cruelty was unfolding in the shadows. Judith and Alvin held Janice captive in a seedy motel room, their grins growing more sinister with each passing hour. They subjected her to unimaginable horrors, their cruelty fueled by a toxic mix of drugs, alcohol, and a perverse need for control. Janice became a plaything, a pawn in their twisted games. Word on the street was that Judith seemed to revel in the torture, her youthful innocence replaced by a chilling detachment. Some whispered that Alvin was molding her, shaping her into a monster in his own image. Others weren't so sure. They saw a darkness in Judith's eyes that ran deeper than any man could create. Either way, one thing was clear. The young couple who had once seemed merely troubled were now a clear and present danger, their souls as cold and black as the Georgia night. Their reign of terror reached its horrific peak with the abduction of 13-year-old Lisa Ann Milliken. The image of the young girl, her eyes wide with terror, her small frame swallowed whole by the darkness, would forever be seared into the collective memory of those who followed the case. Judith, disguised in a wig and a friendly smile, lured Lisa away from an Alabama arcade. The naive teenager, drawn in by the promise of free games and candy, had no idea she was walking into the jaws of hell. Alvin, lurking in the shadows, wasted no time in spiriting Lisa away to a secluded motel room, the same room that had borne silent witness to Janice Chapman's final moments. What followed was a 24-hour ordeal of unimaginable cruelty. Lisa was subjected to unspeakable acts of sexual violence, her youthful innocence extinguished by the flames of their depravity. Judith, far from being a reluctant participant, reportedly took charge, her voice as cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel as she directed Alvin in their gruesome game. They injected Lisa with drain cleaner, hoping to eliminate any physical evidence of their crimes, a chilling detail that sent shockwaves through the nation. But Judith's cruelty knew no bounds. She reportedly forced Lisa to write a letter to her family, a final, heartbreaking message designed to throw the authorities off their trail. Then, with a chilling calmness that belied her young age, Judith fired the fatal shot, ending Lisa's short life and sealing her own fate. Section 5. The law catches up. Judith and Alvin's reign of terror ends. The news of Lisa Ann Milliken's murder ripped through the country like a shockwave, leaving a community reeling and a nation holding its breath. The manhunt for Judith and Alvin Neelley became a media frenzy, their names whispered in fear and disgust in households across America. The law was closing in, the net tightening around the young couple who had sown so much chaos and pain. Their crime spree finally came to an end in a dramatic standoff with police in a crowded motel parking lot. Helicopters circled overhead, their spotlights cutting through the darkness as SWAT teams moved in, their weapons drawn. The air crackled with tension, the silence punctuated by the barking of police dogs and the frantic whispers of onlookers. Alvin, true to his nature, went down fighting, firing wildly at the approaching officers. He was a cornered animal, lashing out in desperation, but his reign of terror was over. Judith, however, surrendered without a fight, her face a mask of indifference as the officers slapped on the cuffs. The image of Judith, clad in a denim jacket and jeans, her hair disheveled, her eyes betraying no emotion, became a chilling symbol of teenage apathy gone terribly wrong. Gone was the scared girl who had run into the arms of a monster. In her place stood a cold, calculating killer, her soul seemingly untouched by the horrors she had inflicted. Section 6. A twisted bond, love, and manipulation in the courtroom. The trial of Judith and Alvin Neelley was a media circus, a spectacle that captivated and horrified the nation in equal measure. The courtroom became a stage, the defendants actors in a real-life horror movie. The prosecution painted a picture of a cold-blooded killer, a young woman who took pleasure in the suffering of others. They presented a mountain of evidence, each piece more damning than the last, painting a portrait of depravity that shocked even the most jaded observers. Judith's defense team, however, spun a different narrative. They argued that Judith was a victim herself, a young woman trapped in a web of abuse and manipulation spun by the much older and more experienced Alvin. They claimed she was brainwashed, coerced into committing these heinous acts by a man she both feared and loved. The courtroom became a battleground for competing narratives, a tug-of-war for the hearts and minds of the jury. Was Judith a heartless killer who deserved to be punished to the fullest extent of the law? Or was she a victim, a pawn in a game masterminded by a master manipulator? The answer, it seemed, was far from clear-cut. The nation watched, transfixed, as the drama unfolded, the line between victim and perpetrator becoming increasingly blurred. The jury's verdict, when it finally came, would have far-reaching consequences, not just for Judith and Alvin, but for the very way we view justice and accountability. Section 7. The Price of Evil, Sentencing, and the Fight for Justice. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, the air thick with anticipation, as the judge prepared to hand down the sentences. The jury had reached their verdict, guilty. Judith and Alvin Neelley were to face the ultimate price for their crimes. Alvin received a death sentence, his fate sealed by the weight of his actions. Judith, however, was sentenced to death row, a sentence that ignited a firestorm of controversy. She was, at the time, the youngest woman in America to be given such a sentence, a fact that sparked outrage and debate across the nation. Prosecutors argued that Judith was a remorseless killer who deserved no leniency. They pointed to her chilling lack of remorse and her active role in the murders as evidence of her depravity. Victims' rights groups rallied behind the prosecution, demanding justice for those whose lives had been cut tragically short. However, Judith's supporters maintained that she was a victim of circumstance, a young woman who had been manipulated and abused by a much older man. They argued that her sentence was cruel and unusual punishment, a miscarriage of justice that ignored the mitigating factors of her case. The debate over Judith's sentence raged on, becoming a lightning rod for discussions about culpability, redemption, and the very nature of justice. Section 8. Life After Death, Judith's Sentence, Alvin's Demise, and Echoes of Horror. The years that followed were a tangled web of legal battles, appeals, and public outcry. Judith's death sentence was eventually commuted to life in prison, a decision that did little to quell the controversy surrounding her case. She became the subject of countless books, documentaries, and true crime podcasts, her story a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most seemingly ordinary lives. Alvin Neelley, however, would never face his punishment. He died in prison in 2005, his life cut short by a self-inflicted wound. His death, while a relief to some, provided little solace to the families of his victims, who were left to grapple with the knowledge that he would never face true accountability for his crimes. The echoes of Judith and Alvin's crimes continued to reverberate through the years, a stark reminder of the devastating impact of violence and the long shadow it casts over those left behind. Their story became a cautionary tale, a reminder that monsters can wear many faces, and that even in the face of unimaginable evil, the pursuit of justice must never cease. Section 9. Judith Neelley, A Legacy of Terror and the Debate That Rages On. Judith Neelley remains behind bars to this day, her case a source of fascination and debate. She has consistently maintained her innocence, claiming that she was a victim of Alvin's abuse and coercion. Her supporters point to her troubled childhood, her young age at the time of the crimes, and the alleged abuse she suffered at the hands of Alvin as evidence that she deserves a second chance. However, for many, Judith Neelley remains a symbol of pure evil, a remorseless killer who took the lives of innocent victims. The brutality of her crimes, coupled with her apparent lack of remorse, continues to haunt the families of those she murdered. The debate over her guilt or innocence, her culpability in the face of alleged abuse, rages on, a testament to the complex and often uncomfortable truths that lie at the heart of the criminal justice system. Judith Neelley's story is a stark reminder that the line between good and evil can be razor thin, and that the human capacity for both love and violence knows no bounds. Her case continues to challenge our assumptions about justice, accountability, and the very nature of evil itself. It is a story that will likely continue to fascinate and horrify for generations to come, a chilling testament to the enduring power of the dark side of the American dream.
All right, my funky people. That's the lowdown on Judith Neelley, the teen terror who took things way too far. She might have thought she was slick, rolling with her man and playing the game like some outlaw queen. But justice don't play, baby. When you dance with the devil, the music always stops, and for Judith, that meant a one-way ticket to lockup. Let this be a lesson to all you cool cats and foxy ladies out there. Watch who you roll with, 'cause not everyone's got good vibes. Evil don't always come dressed in black. Sometimes it's wearing platform shoes and talking sweet. Stay sharp, stay righteous, and don't get caught up in the bad groove. Until next time, keep it cool, keep it real, and stay on the right side of the funk. Peace out, Jive turkeys.